Welcome, everybody. I'm excited for the next hour to spend with you. Folks are responding in the chat where they're from, who they are, what they're at that institution, mascots if you want. I'm Nicholas McConnell. I'm the Academic Assessment Director at University of Pacific. I've only been at Pacific for about the last 2 years, so I definitely still feel like I'm feeling my way into the institution and into the position. We are the Tigers, and many of our programs are located in Stockton, California. We also have campuses in Sacramento and San Francisco. So I have like one window that has my slides that I'll start sharing. I have a second window that has a couple of poll everywhere questions to learn more from you all about where you're at in this process. And then there's also the chat, and it looks like the chat is a way for folks to type questions. I will try to keep my eye on the chat, and hopefully we'll catch questions roughly at the pace that you all are asking them. If I seem to have overlooked something or missed a question, feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom features, and I think that's another way that we can make this a little bit more conversational. So I wanted to open things up and just continuing to welcome folks who are coming in right here at the start of the session. I wanted to open things up with just a really broad question that maybe some of you have answered before or certainly thought about to get just a sense of sort of where we're coming from and some of the different factors in play at our institutions when we think about promoting some of the important student learning outcome assessment work. So hopefully folks can see my screen, and I'm not in slideshow mode yet. But here are instructions to go to poll everywhere and enter, sorry, it's my full name, 392. And just answer this pretty simple question is, who is assessment for? And in a minute, once folks have a chance to do what's on the screen, I'll go over to where the responses are and we can see what folks are entering. Okay, I saw everyone, the instructor, there we go. Get feedback. Everyone, and also faculty. A longer worded lining out who everyone is: students, instructors, administration, parents, future employers. Okay, these are wonderful responses. Instructors, students, the college. So I'm seeing a lot of people with sort of open, inclusive viewpoints of who assessment can serve. Everyone for certain. And so I think that's a great mindset to be in. I'm sure many of us are on the side of folks where we have some responsibility at our institutions for assessment to take place. And often I think we have conversations with folks at our institution who don't necessarily have as broad and inclusive a view of who assessment serves. And maybe some people think that assessment is serving our accreditors mainly, or it's serving us, and there has to be conversation about how assessment can be used to the benefit of students and instructors and the other folks who we really need to participate in the process. To understand what they already know, and for things for faculty. So I have 3 goals for today's presentation about unpacking LMS-embedded learning outcomes assessment. This was my way of broadening it beyond just the Canvas crowd, but I'm talking about Canvas outcomes. That's what's available in our LMS for instructors and students. One goal that I have is I want to make sure that I share, and I will share in chat about midway through the presentation, a link to a resource that my colleagues at Pacific have developed, which is a Canvas course that has a lot of how Canvas outcomes is used laid out, and the intended audience is really faculty and program leads at your institution. And so for folks who are like, well, how does the nuts and bolts work for this? I think we've developed a great resource, and I want to share that with you. Another thing that I really want to do is hear more from you and generate some ideas about how students can be most involved in these things. I've seen examples of using this where it really works as an administrative backend tool. Students are being assessed at some point, and certainly at my own institution, there's conversations where we have some folks who feel like this kind of assessment is something that it's better if students don't even know about it, and we have conversations about them and use information and work toward their best interest, but it's too messy to explain it to them, when we have precious class time to focus on other things. So there are some attitudes like that at my institution, and so I'd love to have conversations about continuing to navigate that. And then anything else that comes up that seems relevant that bounces off of where I'm going to go for this. So just a little bit of background about where we're at University of the Pacific. My president would be upset if I didn't say first off that we are the first and oldest university in California. We were established in 1851. We're a 4-year for undergraduate private nonprofit institution. We have about 50-50 between undergraduate students, and then we have a number of first-degree professional programs and graduate programs. And so we have 3,000 students or a little bit more in both those undergraduate and graduate categories. As I said earlier, we have 3 campuses, and we have 9 different schools and colleges to work with. And recently, a lot of our processes have become more decentralized so that each of these schools and colleges has quite a bit of agency over how they prioritize things, how they deploy resources, and so forth. So Canvas Outcomes is the tool in question, and we are, in the process of trying to make Canvas Outcomes a more widespread tool at Pacific. We are not at the point where we're using it at scale, although we hope to be there for some of our institutional assessment down the road. We have put in a lot of work for exploring what the tool is and really having early conversations about unpacking it, showing what's possible, and giving folks information they need to be able to implement it. But I'll start this with just sort of describing, in case folks here aren't already familiar with Canvas Outcomes, some of the basic of what Canvas Outcomes looks like. So it starts with defining learning outcomes. And so whether you're doing this at the institutional level or you're doing this at the level of a single academic program, you basically define your learning outcome, you define sort of your performance criteria. If you have something that is multidimensional, and so you would have a rubric with multiple rows describing an outcome, then each one of those rubric rows in this Canvas infrastructure would be its own Canvas outcome. So you can organize them and number them accordingly. And then you define for each of these a performance scale, and you can have a different performance scale from every outcome if you chose to. But once these are defined, they live centrally, and then those are sort of the units that get used for assessment in different courses. So what course instructors do at that point is wherever these outcomes live, whether they're in their program or all the way up at the top institution level, they find them and they import them into their course. It is possible, if you are an institution where you create courses or assignments or rubrics in Canvas and simply automatically push those out so that courses are populated centrally outwards with specific tools, you can do it that way. We don't do it that way at Pacific. We don't have the culture of folks accepting a lot of things that are dictated to them that must be in their course. So where we're at with Pacific is faculty go and they import these outcomes into their course. They can embed them. You can create your own assignment that is just the outcome if you want. You can also integrate it with an existing rubric that you have for a different assignment. And then the nice thing about them is that you score them at the same time and place that you're scoring the rest of a rubric. So in SpeedGrader, it's just one extra row that you click. It's completely integrated with the grading process. And so that makes the faculty part of scoring these assessments really easy. Here's an example of what a rubric in Canvas looks like with a couple of outcomes added. So the first 3 rows of this rubric would be what a faculty member created for their assignment. And then the last 2 rows are 2 outcomes that were created elsewhere and were imported into this particular rubric. The little target symbol indicates that it's an outcome. As you can see in SpeedGrader, you do what you would usually do and click through each one of these rows, including the outcomes. And then on the right-hand side, I just pointed out that the instructor, when they import this outcome, would have the option either of having this be worth 4 points with respect to how they're scoring and grading the assignment, or they can choose not to have it be weighted at all toward the grade on the assignment. And that's what's been chosen here. So this outcome doesn't carry any consequences in terms of grading to the students with it when faculty score it. So what that means from the administrative standpoint is once these outcomes are in different Canvas courses and being scored, it's automatically set up so that I can do a very simple set of export commands, and I get a spreadsheet that pulls in every single outcome score that exists for all of the outcomes that exist at whatever administrative level in Canvas I'm running that export. And so if I have access to the top level administrative access for my whole institution, and I have outcomes that I've created at that top level, then I get every score for all of those outcomes in a single export. If a program, multiple levels down has created their own learning outcomes, I don't see that when I do my top level export. And then likewise, someone who has program level outcomes and has access to that branch of their Canvas administrative backend can run an export and see all of the courses that have done all of the outcome scores from all the courses where those outcomes were scored. We have found in practice that what Canvas spits out as the export is somewhat digestible, but it's not like ready to go on the first try. And so there is some effort in understanding different columns of that export file that get populated and knowing that you're really pulling the data that you want if you were to take this data and then go on and do whatever visualization you want to do with it or analyze it to make meaning from the results. So there's a little bit of cleaning that we've found is necessary in this process. And then the main thing, or one of the main things that we're navigating is that instructors at our institution at least have choice in how they set this up. And so it's possible to set it up in a way, if it goes in a rubric for an assignment that already exists, then students who see that assignment rubric will also see the outcomes right there. They'll be able to see their scores once it's scored. You can create assignments that are hidden from students and score outcomes in a way that students never see it. And so we have a diversity of opinions among our faculty upon which of these ways are more comfortable or the better way to do it. And there are multiple ways possible. But it means that students don't necessarily have a uniform experience where everyone is understanding what's happening with learning outcomes assessment in the same way. It really is instructor dependent for us at our institution. So I'm curious to know, and I'll switch us back to poll everywhere, whether where folks are at their own institutions for Canvas outcomes or a similar tool that might exist in your own LMS. So I need to activate that one. So if you go back to the link that I pasted in the chat, you should be able to answer this next multiple choice question. Okay, looks like not many people here have already managed to accomplish this pervasively. A good number in sort of the same boat that we are at Pacific right now is that some folks are using this, but we haven't managed to get it out to everyone yet. And then a bunch of folks who are maybe learning about this for the first time. So I think that's a great distribution for who I'm hoping to have here. Okay, looks like a couple folks are not able to see the poll. Is that still the case? And I'd like to move us on. Okay. Sorry if this isn't working for everyone in their browsers exactly. We joined after the poll link was okay. Got it. So repasting in the chat seemed to address that. And then I'm going to activate the next question in the poll, which is, as you see, as you've encountered tools like this, what excites you about this approach to them? What seems to be great that's possible? Ease of collecting results, for sure. Blends well with standard grading activities within Canvas. Easy to use. Semi-automation, I think that's a really great phrase for what this feels like, at least in my experience. Larger accrediting body. Yeah, the opportunity to share with them sort of longitudinally. If you're doing this in early classes and late classes, maybe you can get evidence that tracks students' progress over time. Likewise, ability for students to see their progress, especially if they're encountering similar outcomes in multiple classes. Okay, already using it. Could bring consistency to a program or institution if you get a lot of folks on board. Gather and process information seamlessly. I will say, and I'll refer back to the presentation that some may have been with from CSU, not CSU, from Long Beach City College, the past hour, where it did look like they had a pretty seamless process and they had some amazing dashboards they created in Tableau. And toward the end, it was acknowledged that how much support they'd gotten from their technology division to make that happen. And so one of the things I'll acknowledge I'm at yet is that I need to have stronger support and a better relationship with our technology division to do some of this more seamlessly than I'm doing on my own, or with the few people that I am collaborating with who are all on sort of the academic side. And then probably folks saw this coming, but in addition to what's exciting about it, the next question in the poll is, what concerns or challenges emerge as you think about, the possibility of implementing, or where you're already at in the steps of implementing something like this? Faculty buy-in, data security and privacy. Item banks, new quizzes. Okay, that's a concern. Training, change management. Getting the faculty involved in security. Okay, it feels like we're seeing some common thread here, is getting folks on board with adopting a system that may be new to them. Comfort with the tech, absolutely. Okay, maybe someone's encountering some doubt at their institution on Canvas and what it can do. So wonderful responses. I'm going to go back to the slides and have a bit of a discussion about what this has looked like at Pacific, especially for things around faculty buy-in and also thinking about how students encounter these systems. So I'll give a snapshot of a few different ways that we're using Canvas outcomes kind of in different settings at Pacific. I'll share some of the things we've done to try to build instructor awareness of this, address concerns that instructors have, and put them in a position where they really can benefit from this. I'll include the link to something that 2 of my colleagues developed that's a self-paced tutorial, and we've made that available to anyone. So I'll make sure that folks are able to get that. And then I'll describe 2 different approaches that we've kind of tried in different contexts and some of the pros and cons of each. And so one approach is making this tool available for folks who want to use it, and basically working with whoever is willing to be an adopter of it, versus trying to really do it at scale and making it something that we ask, or if we are able to insist that everyone use, and that means that you're encountering people who are at different comfort levels with respect to it. And then finally, I would love to have a conversation about what this looks like communicating with students, what's going on in Canvas outcomes, and how the thing that they see on a rubric relates to their education in the particular class and over time at their institution. So here's where Canvas outcomes is happening at Pacific. This really got started by my colleague Jessica Grady, who is, she held the position for a few years of our faculty assessment fellow, so a 50% position where she was doing work with the assessment office while she's full-time faculty in the psychology department. And I cannot overstate the amount of credit that Jess deserves for piloting what this tool can do and really getting a first group of faculty on board and building out some of resources to communicate with instructors what's possible with Canvas outcomes. And so she had a group of faculty who were willing to try it out. They worked through some of the kinks of it. They were often interested in seeing how data from Canvas outcomes could be combined with other data to do things like data disaggregation and look at who they were serving and who they were not serving in their classes or in their programs. And so this was just a handful of people who were committed to using a few different learning outcomes we created in Canvas in their classes and discuss how it was going. In some of our competency-based programs, clinical nutrition is the big example for us, where they have scores upon scores of learning outcomes that their accreditors insist they keep up with. A couple of them have turned to Canvas and really used Canvas and baked their competencies into the Canvas outcomes infrastructure and pushed that out to instructors. I think clinical nutrition is in contract with a third-party vendor that's creating dashboards for them to make meaning of what Canvas outcomes is telling them. And so we have some program level use that's really being explored in a competency-based context. And then finally, Pacific launched its new Gen Ed program in fall of 2021. So we're a year and a half now into the program. And when we developed the assessment plan for this new program and the new Gen Ed learning outcomes, the idea was that Canvas outcomes would be the way that we collect all evidence of program level learning in the Gen Ed program. We did not go 0 to 60 in terms of making it a tool that all GE instructors had to use right away. But we're moving in that direction, and we have it currently in use in one of the 2 first-year Gen Ed courses that every first-year student at Pacific has to take. And so those courses have around 30 sections each, and all 30 sections are using Canvas outcomes, and we're trying to scale it up to the various breadth areas of our GE program that are more integrated with what academic programs are teaching. So some of the resources that we've built and some of the ways that we are working with instructors is, so the pilot faculty group involved a lot of one-on-one correspondence with Jess Grady. We have held a couple of workshops on Canvas outcomes. When the workshops are in the summer, we're able to offer faculty stipends to participate, and it's nearly a day-long workshop where we show what's possible in outcomes, ask faculty to bring an assignment in, and consider how they would adopt the assignment so the outcome is included, and there's communication built up around that so they know how they're sharing with students what the outcome means versus the graded aspects of the assignment. The Gen Ed program has optional monthly meetings where Gen Ed instructors can come together and have conversations about how it's going in their classes, and so we've tried to inoculate some of the assessment practices into those conversations. And then Pacific also for several years it has had an annual assessment conference And in recent years, we've brought in folks who have been using Canvas outcomes and heard different stories at this conference about how it's worked for them. And then finally, and I'm going to briefly exit out of slideshow mode so that I can get the link. We have this tutorial that's a self-paced tutorial in Canvas that gives some background on Canvas outcomes for instructors and shows how to, has some steps for how to do it, and also looks at the communication side and the backend administrative side. So the link to that tutorial is in the chat. You should at your leisure be able to go and walk through it. And so again, credit to Jessica Grady and one of our Center for Teaching and Learning educational designers, David Yu, who really put this together as a resource on Canvas. It includes things like an introduction, how to set up outcomes, ideas for aligning the outcomes in Canvas with assessments that instructors are creating. I will acknowledge that we have more experience at Pacific doing this inside rubrics. It's also possible to integrate outcomes with quizzes in Canvas. I think I saw one person shout out to new quizzes as an area of concern. We also talk about communicating about Canvas outcomes, which I'll get into for the rest of these slides. Outcomes and reporting, sort of what the backend looks like in terms of an export and ways to think about using what Canvas gives you, and then some resources. So please go ahead and use this tool to your avail to whatever degree that you find use for it. So one of the approaches, and really where we're mostly at right now at Pacific, is to enable each instructor to make the choice as to whether they're going to use Canvas outcomes as a way of contributing to program level or institutional level assessment, and take what we can get from the instructors who are willing to use it. I think this was really an advantageous approach at the start because I haven't been at many institutions or heard of many where when the announcement comes that suddenly all faculty are going to do this a particular way and they don't have a choice. I don't know of that going over very well very often. And so allowing folks to opt in really worked for us in terms of piloting it and letting faculty become accustomed to the tool over time, and hopefully positioning folks in some departments who can advocate for it with their colleagues and help bring their colleagues on board. We were able to pitch it as, again, instead of something imposed upon faculty, something that would be an easy add-on for what instructors are already doing. That once they do the scoring inside their own assignments, they're done. They don't have to worry about the rest of it. And then I think another advantage to the opt-in approach is that because instructors were opting in, they really had a level of buy-in that let them choose an assignment they created that was appropriate to the outcome. And so we had some faith and are able to trust in relatively good alignment between how the outcome is defined and the way that the each instructor pairs that with an assignment that's relevant to what they're trying to teach in their context. One of the big challenges has been that in an opt-in basis, it's hard to design this up front and say, well, we know we're going to get a sample of however many students, or we know that we're going to be able to sample from some of our different academic units and programs. And so, we have definitely had to pair this with other ways of doing institutional assessment in order to assure that we have some of the samples we want to work with in order to draw really meaningful stories about how things are going across the institution. So we haven't done it very efficiently because the opt-in approach simply doesn't allow you to predict your sample size. Likewise, consistency from year to year. We may get a number of faculty members participating one year, and then the next year they're teaching different classes, and we have a different group of people that we're working with, and so that can also be less efficient. And then something that definitely came up early in the pilot was that some of the motivation that folks had to opt into this was that they wanted to know in their own classes who they were serving and who they weren't. And one of the early things that we had sort of held out as another reason that they might be interested is that once you get institutional data and you have a way of combining what Canvas has with information about student attributes and other things that you may be interested in, then faculty members can have a story of who is being served in their classes that they don't automatically, at least at our institution, have access to in the first place. And so doing that at a level where we've aggregated everything across the different programs that we're able to pull in Canvas outcomes, we're able to do that. And so we're able to show a broad picture of disaggregated data. But we at this point don't have the infrastructure where we are really being able to then get that to faculty at a faculty by faculty level. And so whereas faculty are hoping that this will tell them something personal about how they're doing in their classes, we've had some trouble following up and actually making that available to individual faculty members. Another approach to this is to try to do it at scale. And so some of the advantages here are ways around the challenges that I described in the first part. So more complete samples of student cohorts. You can be more stable in once you have this at scale, then the outcomes are defined in a particular way. And you can do it year after year. And that also, some of the nuances and outcome definitions at least are dealt with in a standardized way for how the outcomes are implemented in scoring. Where that turns into a challenge is in implementation fidelity. If everyone has their own understanding of what an outcome means, even though the outcome is nominally the same, how do you get folks on the same page so that what one faculty member is scoring and where they hold expectations around an outcome matches what other people are doing in other parts of the university? And then finally, I think this was an example from an earlier presentation at today's SLO symposium. If you have a culture where folks are willing to do this at scale, then that gives it momentum and it becomes part of just what is expected as faculty practice. And so I just want to remind folks that one of our challenges for doing this at scale is that all of these opportunities that we've put forward as ways for folks to engage and learn about this tool have been optional and not required. And so at this point, we're not at a place where we can force someone to come and learn what we're doing. And I think that's really been one of our obstacles so far to implementing this at scale. So one of the challenges in the Gen Ed program is norming and implementation fidelity. Our Gen Ed program doesn't have standardized assignments that everyone in every section is using the same assignment. We give our instructors discretion to create their course theme and develop assignments around their theme that all touch on the same learning outcomes for the course, but don't necessarily ask students to demonstrate evidence in the same way. And what we found is that this would work if we had more crosstalk between instructors about what their different assignments look like and how they're interpreting the particular learning outcome that we're pushing out to them in the context of their different assignments. As kind of a concrete example of that, here is the rubric, or here are sort of the performance criteria for the rubric that we use for one of our outcomes. So this is for civic and global responsibility. We have a 4-point scale going from beginning up to accomplished. And because we see the general education program as something that is serving students as they progress all the way to their degree, and giving students proficiencies that they'll have at graduation, we deliberately defined the scale such that the top end of the scale was around where we expected students to be near graduation. And we wanted to be very transparent about that and have that wording right there within the scale. All the same, a lot of where these outcomes are being used are in first-year classes. And so on the one hand, you have faculty who are scoring this outcome as though in a first-year class, a score of 2 out of 4 on this rubric would be perfectly acceptable. But they're going to set their grading scale in a way that students are appropriately rewarded for the work they do at that first-year level. And so we've had conversations with the faculty who have been challenged to reconcile the way they're grading an assignment and the way they score this outcome, and then also depending on whether students can see it or not, the way they have to have conversations with students where someone's asking, okay, well, I got an A in this assignment, but you're giving me a 2 out of 4 on this outcome. What does that mean? And in spite of the transparency in the text being right there, we found that that wasn't unpacked thoroughly enough to really make people comfortable having those conversations with students. And so this is the final point that I want to get at is how communicating with students work. And so I think one of the things we learned is that if instructors are going to be on the front lines of deploying this in a way that students can see it, They really want to feel like they understand the purpose of it, and they're able to convey it to students in a way that they're not on the spot and using information that they don't feel completely comfortable with. We have provided text that instructors can use, so we sort of drafted something that we thought would be generic for students, but that's kind of one size fits all. And so of course, instructors would probably want to adopt that for their own context. And then there are even questions of, well, if students have follow-up questions about this, is that the instructor's job? Are we adding to instructors' workload by making them the person who has to navigate these outcomes conversations with students, or can we refer students to my office or someone in the gen ed office who's able to represent from a central point of view what that looks like? And then finally, as I had mentioned earlier, there are ways that you can score these outcomes and create them inside an assignment so that students never see it. And that is a way that some of our faculty feel comfortable doing. I see that often as a missed opportunity. We want students to see value in the gen ed program. I think we already have challenges there. We have a lot of students who are in very intense pre-professional programs, and their credit load is such that the GE courses are always competing with courses in their major for their attention. And so we really want to be able to convey a message that these main learning outcomes for gen ed are something that are worthy to students and something that they want to have when they graduate. And so hiding the actual assessment of the outcomes so that students don't see that kind of undermines what we're trying to do to motivate students to participate in our gen ed, to be active in our gen ed program in the first place. And then finally, I think a big question is, what this outcome amounts to is a rubric row that you click and score. There is an opportunity for faculty to add comments the way they would for other parts of a rubric. But how does this get used as a tool that is really advancing students' learning beyond sort of a quick quantitative snapshot of how you did on a particular assignment? And so I think that's an ongoing question that we have. And I'm seeing some conversation in the chat, and this was my last slide. So I hope to open this up to folks' thoughts and questions and conversations about where we are. Okay, can I share the text for students? I don't have a link to share in the chat to it, but I can try to work with the folks who are going to distribute the slides afterwards to see if I can get that into folks' hands. Okay, Jeremy, it sounds like you're in a position where most of your faculty don't want students to see the outcome scoring. And then, yes, the challenge of rubric norming, and I think, we've had, we have faculty, and I'm sure this is true a lot of places, still feeling pretty burnt out after the pandemic. There's a lot of institutional changes around early grading practices that are happening right now. And so I think from different sides, faculty are being asked to do a lot and to change quite a bit in their instruction. And so spending time to show up at a rubric norming session, I think to many folks feels like just one more thing they're being asked to do. So really figuring out what the incentive is for folks to participate in that critical way is something that we're navigating. All right, what else is in chat? Hard time to get the administration to pay for it. Stipending policy and how instructors' time is valued compensation-wise by the institution, I think can absolutely be a factor in buy-in. Yeah, I don't know if I can offer, I'm still on the buy-in and stipending question. I don't know if I can offer any thing that's worked from my office, but I think that one of the things that is helping us is that we have close coordination between the assessment office and the Center for Teaching and Learning. And so, we're able to at least put our heads together with the director of our Center for Teaching and Learning to think about faculty programming and be consistent between those offices in terms of the kinds of things we offer faculty and the kind of incentives that we offer. And then that in turn becomes a conversation with securing resources so that we're able to be better resourced in terms of incentivizing faculty to spend their time on development on things like this. By the way, I'm sorry if I didn't say this explicitly. I welcome anyone to come off camera and share a conversation in person. It doesn't have to all be in chat if folks want to speak out loud. So I'm trying to find the comment about confusing students. Will and Tracy, is there anything you want to share about sort of?
Yeah, I was just saying that I agreed with Tracy. It really does confuse students when you are scoring them sometimes really low. They might get like an A on the assignment, and then if they actually look at the rubric and they see, oh, I got a 1 or a 2 out of 4 on this, it just confuses the student. And so we ran into that a lot early on, and we decided we're just going to hide them for now until we feel like we're able to tell the story to the students well enough, consistently, from instructors and from the beginning, just so that students understand what all of this is. And we're just not quite there yet. So we hide them. And I think that's unfortunate. That's not the way it should be done, but it works for our purposes. It just doesn't help the student.
Yeah, and you used a phrase, tell the story there. And I think that can be really important is that in our GE program, you know, we're still looking to develop a good narrative about what this new GE program is and how it's meaningful for students beyond you know, their first year courses that they're taking. And I think that has to be part for us of what it means for students when they look at these outcomes and see any kind of conflict between the scale we're using and how they expect to be graded. Penny, I saw your hand up a little bit ago. Did you have something you wanted to ask?
Maybe. I just sent something else saying, can we reach out to you later? But we're using Illumin, but we're having Canvas rubrics talk to us. We don't see the same end result, but we're using a lot of the same things you are doing. I'm just trying to figure out if you've talked with anybody about that Illumin connection, or whether it's just Canvas all the way.
At the level of my experience with it, I haven't done anything on the Illumin side of things. I don't recall if any of our programs have bought into adding on Illumin to have an interface with Canvas. I know the clinical nutrition program I mentioned, they actually found a different vendor called Enflux, ENFLUX, that's been working with them. And yeah, so I'm not sure that would be that useful in terms of Illumin. If anyone else here wants to weigh in on that, then by all means we can use the group's collective knowledge, but I might not be as helpful as you hope on that, Penny.
Thanks.
Okay, I see from Yvonne, learn more about an implementation plan from building support through rolling it out implementation stages. So I can talk about it in the context of the GE program. And so for the GE program, our stakeholders include my office, the director of general ed, who sort of work together on getting all of this to happen. In terms of defining the new GE learning outcomes, there was that came out of our shared governments, and we have a pretty large GE committee of our faculty, and I think they formed subcommittees and worked with other faculty, and so each general ed learning outcome had a committee of faculty that agreed upon defining what that was and creating a rubric with a couple of dimensions for that particular learning outcome. I will say that we probably could have done a better job of communicating the way that assessment would happen across different courses and programs with those groups creating those learning outcomes, because some of what was created you know, was very easy to implement through Canvas. And there were some other ones where we've had to go back and forth to make sure that faculty still have ownership of how this learning outcome is defined. And at the same time, the rubrics are set up in a way that they're usable in contexts that actually reflect the courses that are being taught in the Gen Ed program. Who compiles each rubric? Complies or compiles? Who implements each rubric? Right. So the actual, and then I'll come back to the second part of Yvonne's question. So actually creating the rubric inside Canvas and inside outcomes is, we only have 10 learning outcomes or so for the GE programs. And so that's a relatively straightforward task. I ended up being the person who actually instituted these inside Canvas based on what rubrics had been designed on paper by these faculty groups. For our clinical nutrition program, who has, as I said, dozens upon dozens of outcomes, there's a way that you can create a spreadsheet and import a spreadsheet so that if you have it formatted correctly, Canvas will automatically digest a spreadsheet. I think it's a CSV file and create the outcomes from that. And then in terms of rollout, so I think the aspects of rollout are kind of threefold. We have training for our GE faculty. And that training is tied to course recertification. And so as part of the new GE program, everything that had been a GE course in the old program has to get recertified and approved by the faculty GE committee in order to count as a GE course in the new program. And so for multiple summers, we've held a series of summer workshops, again, not mandatory, but that were opportunities for faculty who were trying to recertify their GE courses to understand what was needed and have conversations. Likewise, I think if we could have made those courses a little bit longer and a little bit more of an in-depth and hopefully appropriately compensated experience, we could have had more time within the courses to really talk about the assessment plan and do a better job of selling out Canvas outcomes. As it was, there was, this was coming right out of the pandemic. I think the first summer we offered these courses, we were switching back to in-person learning, and there was an overwhelming amount of faculty concern about what that would look like going back to in-person classes. And so we spent a lot of time that was important in addressing those concerns and weren't able to get as far into the, well, also here's how we're doing assessment. So looking at those GE workshops and how we can get assessment be a deeper part of it, I think is one direction that would help us with rolling it out. And then, we could consider policy-wise the recertification process itself if there was more around the buying into Canvas outcomes that was actually tied to recertification. That might be one way to be a little bit more heavy-handed in bringing faculty on board to using this in the GE program. In terms of what we're actually doing, because we haven't done it that way, we've started with the 2 first-year courses that every first-year student takes. And so building up instructors using the tool in those courses. And then starting next year, we're going to move to really try to do this at scale in the other courses that aren't necessarily first-year courses, but are GE courses in different academic programs. Okay, Tracy, so trying to align it with badging, that is, okay, tough going. I would love to hear more about that, because I think that to the degree that students value badges and see that as something they want, I think that could be a good avenue for adding value to other ways that learning outcomes are kind of defined and used at your institution.
We're really new in the process for both the badging and bringing Canvas outcomes to the table. So the proposition was put out there that if we link the two, that it might help the students gain a better appreciation and value for Gen Ed. We do have badging going on in our workforce, so we're bringing it over to the academic side. So it's kind of all, coalescing at the same time. And I'm hoping that making those alignments will really help move the needle for us.
Yeah, we're kind of, not even my office, but there are parts of the institution that with us that are exploring badging. We have a couple of badges, but it hasn't really taken off yet. And I'm interested to see where that goes. And hopefully there are opportunities for us too. But I do like that idea if badging is something that really has cachet on your campus. Okay, and we'll giving more information about what faculty are required to use and how they plug them into different assignments. I think the story that I can flesh out on that for us was faculty in one of these first year courses are really strongly encouraged to do an annotated bibliography assignment. And that assignment ties in pretty well to a couple of our information literacy outcomes that are the GE outcomes, one of the GE outcomes for that first year class. And so it wasn't until we finally had a meeting with faculty and asked folks to bring in different examples of the annotated bibliography that we learned that what different instructors expected to be included in that, how much depth of analyzing the meaning of the source within the bibliography versus it being a more abbreviated annotated reference list were pretty different. And so faculty, again, this goes back to norming and implementation fidelity. Faculty were bringing their own expectations about what an annotated bibliography is into what had been set up as, sort of a nice scalable structural part of this first year course. And it was great to be able to have that conversation, and we'd simply love to be in a position where we can incentivize more faculty to take place. So it's more than just a few of our instructors who are participating in those things.
Hey, Nicholas, have you figured out how best to do norming? I know right now it's not really at scale at your campus. You've got like certain people who are invested, and so they're piloting it. But when you think about it being at scale with dozens of faculty using the same rubric, how are you imagining that you're going to do norming?
Yeah, I think that our approach, so we haven't had this conversation yet. I mean, I think we're at the point of building the will to step into that direction. I would probably be thinking of as many ways to make it, or parts of it, an asynchronous process as possible. And so I think you can have examples live somewhere that, pardon me, you can have examples live somewhere where faculty can access them and participate and contribute asynchronously. I think conversations, that back and forth dialogue is really important toward norming. But even that doesn't necessarily have to be a synchronous conversation. And it's something I clearly have to think about more, is if we're trying to do norming that involves a dozen or more faculty members, a few dozen in the case of our GE program. Yeah, how to have everyone do that and being part of that in a meaningful way. And I think one of the things that we do have as a resource for us now is that we have tried doing this scoring without a lot of norming. And so we have, the distribution we have. And so we have some data to sort of lead into the conversation of motivating norming and pointing out some aspects in the data that we have that give us evidence that, they're not fully reliable because they were not normed. And so starting with data that, you wouldn't necessarily stand by and using it as a conversation starter for why we're trying to get to where we get is another thing that, because of the way we've done things, we're in a position to do.
And then a specific doing, like setting targets for these to have like a certain percentage of students reach a level 3 or something like that.
Yeah, I think that is very challenging because I showed the rubric and we have this qualitative sense that most students in their first year are going to be at a particular level. And then certainly by the time they graduate, more of them will be at some of our higher levels. But frankly, I'm kind of uncomfortable with any a priori assumption about the fraction of our first year students who should be doing something competently versus at a developing versus a beginning level. And I think certainly coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of things that our first year faculty are seeing about ways that students are prepared in different ways from before the pandemic. And so I think it would be hard to hold that assumption about where students ought to be, especially early on, that would set that as a precursor to the assessment instead of that also being something that we're learning coming out of it. But it does make norming a little bit more difficult if you don't have a clean target. Well, thank you everyone for staying on and for adding your thoughts on this. I'm here and I'll put my email in the chat one more time if anyone does want to follow up by email. Hopefully I will be able to get the example of the text that we share with students out to folks through the people who are organizing the SLO symposium. I'll put the link to the Canvas tutorial in the chat one more time in case folks didn't grab that the first time. Again, credit to my colleagues, Jessica Grady and David Yu, for developing that tool.